So, Representative O'Mara, it's great to finally be speaking with you. I'm glad we finally got this on the calendar.
Yeah, me too.
So, today we're going to be mostly talking about the new budget, the difficulties that Democrats experienced finalizing that budget,
Mhm.
and future plans for the state of Pennsylvania. So, okay, listen. So, I wanted to kick things off and definitely discuss this budget process and impasse that just went on. Why did it take more than 4 months to pass this budget? And what sort of structural changes can we support in the future to prevent any sort of impasse that threatens schools, transit, and nonprofits alike?
Yeah, so I think if there was a simple answer as to why we wouldn't have had it happen, I think many factors led to a 4 month impasse. Primarily, it's only the 23rd budget that we have passed since the power dynamic has changed in Pennsylvania. And so we are one of the few states across the country that has a divided legislature. So Democrats control one chamber, Republicans control another, and then the governor is a Democrat. And they're the three groups that are really sitting at the table: the House, the Senate, and the governor. So I think there is still a resistance to that shift in power and sort of a digging in of heels, if you will, really on both sides. I don't think anyone is innocent or didn't play a part in this elongated process. But I do think there has been a resistance to seeing the Democrats take control and, a feeling like let's just wait them out and not govern. But that isn't working. And I think this 4 month process showed that. I think realistically, we also would not be being honest if we didn't talk about the elephant in the room, which is next year is election year, right? Our governor is up for reelection. He is Governor Shapiro is very popular in Pennsylvania, according to polling. And I do see an attempt in in Harrisburg to kind of delegitimize his success as governor heading into the election year, right? And that's just that was a component. And I think the other thing that is not as widely out there is that the House Democrats were very united in our budget asks, right? We wanted SEPTA funding, we wanted public school funding. That was unanimous across our caucus. The Senate Republicans, while I'm not a member of their caucus, I can only tell you the information I'm aware of, but is that they're not united, right? They had different wants, different desires in their top priorities. And I think that actually led to an inability to get the votes on in out of the Senate, because for a while there was still fighting amongst the ranking members in the Senate on things like skilled games and what that would look like. Frankly, SEPTA funding, the Senate Republicans were not united on how they wanted to fund SEPTA, if they wanted to fund SEPTA. And so I think there's just some of the factors. Ultimately, though, and you said, what can we do to change that? Um, One of the realities is I'm a rank and file member. I am not one of the people sitting at the negotiating table. The negotiating table is rather small. It's the leadership in the Senate, leadership in the House, and the governor's office. I think I don't know if we could ever make it happen. But I think if all legislators' pay was automatically suspended, and like, to be fair, right now you can choose to opt in to not taking a paycheck. No one in leadership chooses that. So, like, I personally don't. I'm a single income household. I don't think you can expect working people to be in government and expect us not to be paid. That being said, if when you get to a budget impasse, every legislator isn't getting paid across the board, across the aisle, that budget's going to get done. That's
Yeah.
just my opinion. And ultimately, I do think when you look at the negotiating table, if you're not liking what you're seeing, change who's sitting there. And that comes in the responsibility of the voters and who they're sending to Harrisburg, but also in us and who we're electing to lead us and lead us in these negotiations, both in the House and in the Senate. And I do think there was a lot of frustration this time seeing this budget stretch on. Um, there was also, I think, a feeling, probably because of what's happening in Washington, D.C., that we need to fight and hold out for things that matter. And the SEPTA funding was one of those things that the public was pushing us not to cave on a budget until we got that funding. Now, I know we didn't ultimately get that funding in the budget, and the governor still had to and I think we're going to talk more about SEPTA funding, so I won't belabor the point, but I think there was also a feeling among some of my colleagues that we needed to fight to hold out for a budget that actually delivered the things that Pennsylvanians are demanding to see right now. So would this impasse have happened in 2021 in a different federal government in 2019? I don't know. But I think a lot of factors led to kind of the perfect storm in 2025.
Yeah, it seems like transit was most of the outrage in terms of the budget amongst the people that I've talked to. I guess, like, why was there no new recurring funding added for public transit, especially given how critical it is for working class and transit oriented communities around Philadelphia, and also critical for red counties throughout the state, since Philly and the surrounding counties subsidize those red counties?
Yeah, so you're correct. And as chair of the Southeast delegation and a member from Delaware County, I'm hyper aware of the need. I mean, I rode SEPTA for 7 years when I worked at Penn. It was the way that I got to work, the way I earned money. And prior to that, I've been a lifelong rider. So from the suburbs in a congested area, seeing the significance and the need for public transit, how it moves workers, I'm all in. I think the problem we face is twofold. Public transit looks different in those red counties that you just mentioned. In many counties, blue or red across the Commonwealth, public transit is not trolleys and subways and regional rail. It is buses. It is large bus systems that encompass multiple counties that, unless you really need public transit to take you to the doctor or to the grocery store, you're not using it. It is unique to Philadelphia and our region, to Pittsburgh, and to a couple other pockets of Pennsylvania, to have public transit be ingrained within the community and utilized right for fun, for sports, for work. So it's still an education problem. And for many years, the push for transit came really heavily from Philly and from SEPTA. What we've tried to do differently in the last year or two, and frankly, I think it's been successful in at least making SEPTA I'm sorry, let me correct myself, making transit be a part of the conversation in Harrisburg, is we've united all these transit agencies. So under different advocacy groups, they're now working together and trying to speak the same language. So that education piece, to convince some of my colleagues that it kind of ties into our second issue. Some of my colleagues don't want to send more money to Philadelphia, and that's for various reasons, right? I'm not one of those people, but the feeling of bad things happen in Philadelphia is a real concern that we fight against in Harrisburg. And frankly, the political shift that happened in Harrisburg was driven through the suburbs, right? The suburbs, Delco, Chester County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, they all have gone from red to blue. And so I think there's a resistance from um, those in power in Harrisburg, from other parts of the Commonwealth, to send more money here. We can show them all the charts, turn blue in the face, saying how we're producing money that your counties are relying on.
They
It's
don't
not,
care.
they don't care. So we have to continue the education, but we also have to step up that pressure in parts of the state outside of ours. Um, and we're getting there, but we weren't able to see it through in the budget this time around. There was ultimately not the Senate Republicans came and said we want skilled games for mass transit funding, and we were all like, okay, great. But then they never could bring forward a skilled games proposal that their caucus agreed on. Even if we showed them one, they weren't agreeing because they all have different ideas of how to get there. So that sort of dysfunction within that caucus, I think, spilled right into SEPTA funding. And then the politics of this, of sending more money, giving a win to Governor Shapiro, like that all kind of tied in with one another. And then the big thing was that court case. I know in September, around September, end of the summer, as SEPTA's cuts started hitting, there was a court case filed to stop them, and then ultimately, judge in Philadelphia ordered SEPTA not to do the cuts and to use their capital funding for their operational costs. That, I think, was well intended in the court, in the person who filed the lawsuit and what they were trying to fight for, but it really hurt the negotiations because now SEPTA had it wasn't coming from the right place, but they now had the funding for 18 months. And so I think the Senate Republicans argued, it's not as urgent anymore, and it bought us more time to figure this problem out. What it did, though, really was create a now huge problem in the capital funding side. And that's what Governor Shapiro addressed earlier, a couple weeks ago. In Chester County, he announced funding that they were going to redirect to fill that capital budget. But the problem isn't going away. And my
Yeah.
colleagues and I are not letting it go away. We know we need a real solution. We are one of the largest transit agencies in the country, and we receive the least amount of funding from the state at SEPTA. And that's not going to continue. It's not working, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure that future budgets do include SEPTA funding. I am not giving up, and I know I'm not alone.
Yeah, it seems like this is just a cyclical fight every year with transit. I
Yeah.
guess, is there any way to implement like a permanent solution where we would implement some sort of progressive revenue source, like a corporate or high income tax that's dedicated strictly to mass transit funding rather than relying on these one-time reserves?
Well, what was so frustrating was we actually did come up with a long-term plan. So what we were without new taxes, we were taking the sales tax revenue and just reapportioning the money and sending more of it to the public transit. I think it's Public Transit Trust Fund is the name. We use a lot of acronyms, but into public transit. What was also great on this compromised bill that we came up with is we were also creating a commission to come up with solutions, and that commission was going to be made up of bipartisan leaders from Harrisburg and transit agency representatives from across the Commonwealth. We also have seen proposals on taxes on shared drives like Ubers or Lyfts, um, that could help be directed directly into mass transit. There's just always a resistance in Harrisburg on raising taxes. If you call it a fee, maybe they'll be more into it, but taxes scare
It's the
people.
buzzword. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it isn't often that we can come to the table and say, look, here's a solution that's going to give us the money we need, and it's using money we're already collecting. And that solution is on the table. And so we don't need, we have the solution there. We just need to implement it. And the House, as a member of the House, I have voted yes on that proposal three times or four. I think I'm up to four times over the last two sessions. And so I'm just feel a little bit like I'm beating my head against the wall trying to build this case because it's a slam dunk, and we don't often get presented with slam dunks in Harrisburg.
Yeah. It's probably tiring too, having a
It is.
slam dunk. Yeah. Okay, so transit aside, another thing that people were discussing that was left out of the budget was the climate policy rollback. So I
Yeah.
guess, how do we justify the cap and trade being removed?
So what I will say is it's not a rollback because we've never actually seen benefits from Reggie. I have voted to support Reggie and to defend Governor Wolf's um so backtrack. We entered into Reggie, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, under Governor Wolf under executive order. It was never legislated through the legislature. We did vote to defend his executive order, I want to say like 5 times under his time as governor, but it was never passed by the General Assembly. Therefore, it went to court. There were a bunch of members um, in the House and Senate and also outside entities who sued over Reggie. They actually were successful, and we, under Governor Shapiro's leadership, have appealed that decision to block Pennsylvania from entering Reggie under the argument that it was done illegally because it was through executive order and not by legislation. And so, while I was disappointed that after all these times I have voted to keep it, I'm now voting to take it away. I viewed it as an opportunity for us to really drive energy policy because now at this point, Reggie isn't even going to be enough. Like, we've waited too long. The climate crisis is getting worse, and we need to act now. And so I'm hoping that seeing the public outcry to this coming out of our budget will motivate my leadership and my colleagues in the House to take action. Governor Shapiro has a plan, a PACER plan, that would actually put a price on carbon emissions, which could see an even larger impact. We're currently trying to follow what's going on with PJM because energy prices are rising because there are not enough projects entering. We have renewable projects that are ready to go, but they're not able to enter the grid because of the holdup on projects being added through PJM. So I also think at the end of the day, the the win that the Republicans are boasting is ending Reggie. Well, we never had Reggie, and we were almost certainly going to lose it in court. That's their win that we were able to get in turn for massive education funding, and some of the other working family, or I'm sorry, this tax credit that we just passed is the EITC, but it's good thing, earned income tax credit.
Mhm.
For working people. We got some really big wins in this budget, and we wouldn't have if there wasn't a compromise. Compromise in Harrisburg is scary but important. And so I think at the end of the day, they were able to convince me that it was worthwhile because we got so many other wins. We haven't even seen these benefits from Reggie, and it wasn't going to be enough at this point. And there's nothing stopping us from legislating it, which is kind of the argument as we have watched. I guess what I would say is my perspective has changed watching President Trump use executive orders to bypass Congress has really opened my eyes to not wanting even my own governor to use executive orders when we should be legislating, because it's easier to take those policies away when that governor isn't there anymore, and it wasn't done correctly through the process. Now, while I appreciate Governor Wolf, at the time he was dealing with a legislature that wouldn't acknowledge climate change at all and just was constantly making it worse. So he was trying to do what he could with his limited resources. I get that. Um, but I also understand wanting us to legislate it, and I'm ready to do it if they are.
So moving out of the budget and into education, um, there is a big issue in this state with public school funding and equities. I guess what are some specific steps that we can take at the state level to sort of reduce the funding gap between wealthy and underfunded districts? I mean, I know most of the funding is tied up in property taxes.
Mhm.
Is there any way to get out of this cycle?
I think the property tax system that we have created, while is not ideal in many places, I think realistically, us completely changing that would take decades and well thought out policy. It would take buy in from across the Commonwealth, and I don't know if that sort of agreement or compromise is there. That being said, what we've done in the past is we sort of collected all this funding and then we pushed it out using a population formula that was set in the 80s. Population in Pennsylvania, since were kids, has shifted dramatically. And parts of the state that used to have robust populations don't anymore, and parts of the state like ours are growing. So we've seen this inequity grow. We did try and correct that. Under the legislature in 2015, they changed the funding formula, and every year the percentage of money that's pushed through the formula that is now based on the number of students at a school instead of the number of people who used to live there, it grows. When I started the legislature, that percentage was 10%. It's now much higher. It's still not 100% though, right? So it's going to take time for that to correct itself. The Commonwealth Court ordered that Pennsylvania was not meeting its funding requirement for fairly funding all schools about a year and a half ago. And last year's budget really did make significant progress by, first of all, increasing the funding, but also sending additional funding to the lowest ranked schools funding wise across the Commonwealth, which was a new line of money, which was great. We still need to continue those payments. I think it would take 7 years of a budget to look like that before we're there. And this year was year two. And we did do well in getting education funding out this year. I think the most meaningful thing we can do quickly is cyber charter reform. We started it in this budget. We didn't get everything we wanted. We have some reform in checking on mental health of kids, making sure that if you're in cyber school, someone's seeing the student. We have some of those changes made, but the cyber funding we haven't fixed. And that is such a problem because right now, if you have a student that's, say, attending I live in Springfield, but say my daughter decides to go to cyber charter, the money that Springfield gets for my student has to follow the student. So they have to now pay the cyber charter. There is no set rate of tuition. So these cyber charters are charging large amounts for tuition every year. And so we have data that shows how much hundreds of thousands of dollars are being taken from schools to pay for the tuition of cyber charter schools. These are cyber charters, not even brick and mortar. These aren't schools that are buildings. And so what we have proposed is a flat tuition rate that would set one rate for all the cyber charter kids, and it would help schools save tremendously on keeping dollars in the district. And while we can't say what every school will do and how they spend it, we hope it's going to provide some relief to property taxpayers if the state is picking up the slack and sending more funding. Because right now, when they don't get it, they have to come to their taxpayers and take it from us another way. And so while I don't see in my experience, I don't know if we can end property taxes in general. I do think we could do a whole lot more to make it so schools aren't so reliant on property taxes, and then that would provide relief to taxpayers.
If Harrisburg did have the political will, what would be like one or two solutions to fix the funding inequities?
Well, we could close our corporate tax loopholes. Right now, corporations in Pennsylvania can file their reports by having shell companies in other states and then filing there. We want to close that and have combined reporting, which would require them to pay taxes here. Another thing that we don't do is we don't tax advertisements in Pennsylvania. So when you see digital ads, pharmaceutical ads, all these different ads that you see on TV, we are not taxing them. And it is a ginormous industry. The state of Maryland has passed legislation that would tax, and they're collecting millions of dollars. Now
Wow.
we have to be careful and make sure that we are not going after content creators and small businesses. This is trying to go after like the Google and Meta and the healthcare industry, but it's something that some of my colleagues have been looking at for a number of years, but we now have more like I actually had a group come meet with me about trying to pass legislation on this specific type of tax revenue. So I think we're starting to see it was a you would know the name of the organization. I'm still 4 months postpartum, so I am still having brain fog, but you would recognize the name.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, my second baby. But um it was nice, like, hearing Pennsylvania advocacy groups are starting to figure out what we could try and do in terms of taxing these big corporations.
Yeah, I didn't even think of taxing advertisements. That's
Hmm.
interesting.
Hmm. And
Uh,
also, though, think about when you watch TV, how many ads you see for
so
medicine you'll
much.
never take, or it's so rare, like only such a small percentage of the population would even qualify for taking it. I wonder why, because they're not being taxed to put it out there.
The next thing I wanted to touch on was something Delco specific. There is a lot of frustration with some people regarding the increasing property taxes in back to back years. And
Hmm.
we know this is due to an inherited financial mess from previous Delco government, as well as to cover inflation, labor costs, upgrading systems that haven't been upgraded in decades, and disappearing federal funding.
Yeah.
So the problem is a county really only has so much power to raise revenue, and the biggest one is property taxes.
Hmm.
What can we do at the state level to empower these counties more to raise revenue?
So we have done some things. I don't know. I mean, I've heard some complaints about it, but the we passed legislation allowing the counties to tax or to raise a fee I know it's a buzzword, but it's what they call it. When you renew your car registration, you may notice now you pay an additional $5 fee that goes directly to Delaware County. They had the option to pass that. We also, as a Commonwealth, do. I mean, the county isn't passing it, but many municipalities are now passing EITs because local boards have that authority. I think the biggest thing we could do to help is provide more support in some of the areas where the county is just hemorrhaging money because of the cost. The biggest one that comes to mind is mental health funding. The county is a part of one, we meet with, at the state level, there are organizations that represent borough borough council members, supervisors, township commissioners, and county commissioners or councils. CCAP is the one that covers counties, and they have been raising the alarm on mental health costs that counties are facing and just how expensive it's getting, because counties are required to provide mental health services, and they've been asking for the state to give them an update that they desperately need. I've been advocating for that funding as chair of the mental health caucus. I think in last budget we got them $20 million increase, but they were asking for like the $200 million increase. So what they were asking for and what we were able to provide them, huge valley of
Tenfold.
between.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I really feel for the county because they're in a really tough position, and they're not, Delaware County is not the only county raising taxes. It's happening across the Commonwealth. Some of the most Republican counties are also raising taxes. And it's just because of the situation financially that they find themselves in. The one thing I will commend the county on is last year when they raised taxes, they heard a lot of feedback. And one of the things that they did in response under Vice Chair Richard Womack was they formed a budget committee with residents. You were invited to
Yeah.
apply to be on it, and
Yeah.
they
It was
had,
that budget task force.
yeah, the task force. They
Yeah.
had they had different committees within the task force focusing on revenue, focusing on cuts, focusing on all the different components of the budget. And if you talk to the people on that task force, even the staunchest objectors to raising taxes have said to me, we've done everything we could. Like, we've cut everything we could without cutting people's pay, without taking, and even there, I know the county's trying to look at what benefits they can potentially cut back on for new hires, but without making the experience worse for their employees. The county has done everything they possibly could to offset these increases. Um, but they are where they are. And I think what I'm frustrated by is the disingenuous opposition. I live in Springfield, and I know the Republican Party here, and I know we're not supposed to be super partisan here, but like, this just is what it is right now in taxes and increases and who's talking about it. The Republican Party just is blasting the Delco Council for raising taxes. And meanwhile, the Board of Commissioners in Springfield, which is 7-0 Republican board, voted to raise taxes on residents last year, and they're voting to raise taxes on residents next week, and they're talking about implementing an EIT in 2026 and raising taxes again at the end of next year. So it's happening everywhere. We're all feeling it, right? I was just talking to my mom about how expensive Thanksgiving was. Like, every family budget is feeling it. So of course our municipal and county budgets are too. But it is not at the blame of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, frankly, it's not even at the blame of the Republican Party in terms of locally boards having to do this. You have fiscal requirements that you have to meet. I think we all just need to stop pointing fingers and try to appreciate the people that are trying to make our government work. And if you don't like it, try and become a part of it, right? Like, there's nothing stopping you from getting involved. And um, if you don't like what you're seeing, trying to fix it. But I really do commend County Council on trying this year to avoid this increase. And I feel like they're not in an easy place.
No.
I don't envy the position that they're in.
Is there anything the state can do, though, to give counties more options to raise revenue, or does the buck stop at the state for giving the county more funding? I guess how do we get around continuously raising property taxes?
It just depends on like how you're trying to raise revenue. I don't really what I'm not aware of is attempts for the county to raise revenue that the state is telling them no. Do you know what I mean? I know that um the revenue committee in the task force said, short of implementing new fees on things like the registration on the car, the $5 fee on car registration, they were having a hard time coming up with ideas um, on ways that the county could raise revenue. Just because if you think about how you would raise revenue, the ways that you do it are getting people to pay for things. And I don't know what the county isn't offering, right? And even the members of the task force said that the thing that they were most astonished by was seeing that the county's doing everything that they possibly can. I'm not aware of the state hamstringing them on things they want to do right now,
Fair.
or
Uh,
of asks. I'm also not aware of things they're asking us to change. Like that registration thing, that was something CCAP asked us to change for them. The thing that they're really hammering for us right now is that we need to help them pay for things that we can afford to help them with. One of the biggest things that the state doesn't help with that we should, and I am a firm believer of that, is fire and EMS services. That is it's so crazy to me the way it's done. I was born in Philadelphia. My dad was a firefighter in Philadelphia, where that is a paid position. It's crazy to me that out here in the suburbs, we expect people to volunteer. I am so full of admiration for our volunteer firefighters and for our volunteer EMTs, but the fact that they don't get paid for it is crazy. And now counties and municipalities are being asked to figure out huge swaths of areas that have no coverage when places like Crozier close. And it's not just Delaware County dealing with this. That was a big expense that the county wasn't expecting. And some companies are even moving into hiring paid people because they can't keep up with volunteers. And I do think that is an example of an area where we're not stopping them from raising revenue, but we're not supporting them the way that we should from the Commonwealth level. And that lack of support, I think, is what is putting counties in these positions more than anything else.
Makes sense. So I know you're very busy. One of the last topics I wanted to touch on was just elections and campaign financing in general in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. From what I've read, Pennsylvania hasn't updated its campaign finance laws since I think it was 1937. PACs can donate unlimited amounts of money to a campaign, and there are absolutely no restrictions on how candidates can use the money, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's for personal stuff. It seems like it's really just a wide open system with no regulation. Are we anywhere close to fixing this? And why doesn't it really seem like a priority?
It is crazy. Like I say Pennsylvania is like the wild, wild west of campaign finance. There is, I will say, there are regulations. We do have to report our donations. Um, and if you don't report it on time, you have to pay fines. Are they expensive enough to deter people from turning them in late? No, but they do exist. You do have to report if you take income from other places as a legislator, if you accept gifts, all that stuff has to be reported. What happens to you if you don't do it though? Those um penalties I don't think are great enough to deter bad actors. And while you're right in like what you can spend your money on, I'm careful, right? I have a group of people that I pay to run my compliance, and before I spend money on anything, I ask them if this is an allowable expense. They check against the FEC. If it is federally, generally it is here. But you can get creative in ways that I don't like. And I think for so long it was unchecked because people weren't paying attention. One of the things I hear about from my colleagues who have been in Harrisburg for a long time, and I mean a long time, some have been there before I was born, will say that social media has changed things and has brought a level of scrutiny on this job that didn't exist before. that some of them don't like. And so I think for a while it just didn't change because no one was complaining about it. Now people are complaining about it, but there are people who in power who are benefiting from this system, right? And so change is possible. I fully believe change is possible, and I am one of the legislators in the House who has been advocating for reforms. Like, I sign on to the gift ban bill every year. I sign on to the redistricting bill every single year. I would be more than happy to see legislation. I know Representative Kenyatta and Solomon have a package of bills around campaign finance reform that would change loopholes around dark money, which is when independent expenditures don't have to file their donors. That's a real problem. Um, some of they have bills that would put limits on donations, because right now someone could give me $1 million if they wanted to run for state representative. I think their proposal would cut it down to $10,000, more similar to federal limits. Um, I think there are people out there that want to see it. Are there enough? Not yet. But there are groups that are raising awareness, like Fair Districts, March on Harrisburg, among others. And frankly, they're getting reform candidates elected, and that is what it's going to take to make significant change. Um, but I do think there's also a push, and we've actually had some success in digitizing the campaign finance the campaign finance world, because one of the problems is you can turn in a paper report that you hand wrote that could take weeks for somebody to take and type it into the computer to then have it be into a searchable database that you and I could use as a constituent who's curious, who's influencing their campaign. We have seen bills move out of the House that are pushing requirements for digital reporting and things like that. They've fallen in the Senate. So I think politics is a place where electoral results will drive the policy results that you want. And so if this is the topic that you really care about, look at who's not moving these bills and look at what you do to change that. Because there is a growing push for reform in Harrisburg. Um, there's a growing push for reform, I think, across the country, but
Totally.
we're feeling it. And frankly, I think it's a bit of an age thing. And I'm not saying, like, I don't mean to be ageist in any way. I have utmost respect for my colleagues who are wiser than me. Um, but I think as millennials and Gen Z, people who like grew up in this ultra digital world and who demand accountability immediately and who want results right away, like, we have computers in our pockets. I think as we take over in positions of power at legislatures and executives, and um, it'll change as we infiltrate, I hope.
Is there any talk of working towards the New York City method of having ranked choice voting and publicly financed elections, or are we just so far away from that that's not even a discussion?
No, to be honest with you, no, that's not a discussion yet. In a meaningful way, there's dreamers, right? Like, there's people who talk about how much we would love that. I've been following Zoran Mamdani's campaign for about a year because I know the people who ran his digital campaign. Um, you know, he only had that opportunity because of public financing.
Totally.
I think what we have a better chance of in Pennsylvania is some more electoral reforms. I think open primaries is something that we could realistically get done.
Agreed.
It might it might not be legislated in like a true open primary way. We might see same day registration, or a, t- a something be put in place that allow you to come in and like change your voter registration and pick a party to vote that day. Um, but I do think it's possible. I also think we could see early voting in Pennsylvania, and I think there's more of a stomach for pre-canvassing and some of these election reforms around mail-in ballots. I mean, one of the proudest votes I've taken is bringing mail-in voting to Pennsylvania. That only happened in 2019, just in time for the pandemic in 2020. But that was a major reform, and one that we've been able to get done in the last 5 years. So I do think there is chance for reforms. It's just like Are the biggest ones going to come first? No. But will they happen eventually? I have hope. If I didn't have hope, I wouldn't keep doing it.
Exactly. Well, that's good to hear. Okay, I know you're very busy, but just real quick, I wanted to know what your vision for Pennsylvania looks like. Like, what's most important to you in the state?
Well, I think right now, the most important thing for me is that we have a state where families are fed, healthy, and able to provide for themselves and their families. And that can be done in some real simple ways. Minimum wage hasn't been raised in the state since I was in high school. I'm not in high school anymore, and now I'm mom to two kids. Almost about to celebrate my 20-year high school reunion, so that's time to change. People, what we've seen is costs are rising faster than wages, and we're feeling that in our houses. I would love a Pennsylvania where students come to college here and stay in Pennsylvania here because the job programs are so robust, or the cities are so vibrant with mass transit and art and culture and great schools that they want to stay and play and raise their families here. I really want We have an older state, one of the oldest states in the Commonwealth. We need to be able to make sure that we're providing enough care for our seniors and that they're able to retire in dignity. And that means investing in home care workers, right? Investing in nursing homes, investing in Medicare, and making sure that seniors have programs that they're utilizing. So all these things are possible. And I really think doable in my time in the legislature. Um, we just need to continue fighting and continue to elect people that have the political will to make those things happen too. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. If you want to help me raise minimum wage, come fight with me in Harrisburg.
Love it. Awesome. Well, we have been speaking with Pennsylvania House Rep Jennifer O'Mara. It was wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you.
And I hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah. Next year's a big election year. Let me know when you want to have me on to talk about elections.
Anytime.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick. Have a
Thanks
great
so
one.
much. Bye.
Take care.